Raiders rookies report to training camp on the 17th. The Silver and Black created a roster spot by waiving quarterback Carter Bradley. That plus more on Tuesday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for July 15th, 2025.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Definitely appreciate you. If you're catching the show wherever you find your favorite podcast, or you're checking us out by way of the YouTube page, you know we appreciate both. Show grows each and every day because of your consistent support and the great job that my man Ari does behind the scenes, making sure we look good and sound good each and every day. We appreciate him. We shout him out. Does fine work. He's on Twitter at Ari Produces. If you want to hit him up, you can hit me up as well at your boy Q254. And if you want to be a part of the show, we got the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line at 707-654-4693. We'll hear from you coming up in segment number 3 of today's show as we close things out. And as you can imagine, talked about the Raiders Mount Rushmore as a project for the Locked On Podcast Network. Talked about that on Monday's show. As you could tell and as you could imagine, tons of feedback on the Mount Rushmore. So we'll talk about that. You'll hear from Raider Nation in segment number 3 to close things out. Segment number 2, we'll continue with our Mount Rushmore conversation. Matter of fact, I had a really good tweet pointing out something about my Mount Rushmore. So I'll go ahead and read that tweet and think about my Mount Rushmore, the 4 that I had there, and how I can make a few adjustments based off what this tweet pointed out. So I'll explain all that, let you know what that means. We'll do that in segment number 2, have a little bit of fun here on today's show. Segment number 1, news and notes of the day, as we always do, and we'll get into that after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, and that's Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. So first things first, when it comes to the Raiders roster, they did make a move on Monday. Carter Bradley, the 4th quarterback on the roster, was waived. So now it's Geno Smith, Aiden O'Connell, and Cam Miller, the 6th-round pick from North Dakota. Those are the 3 arms that are left on the Raiders roster as of right now. Doesn't mean that those are going to be the only 3 in training camp. They probably will have another arm at some point just to, let guys have a few reps off and be able to save their arm throughout the course of training camp. They normally do that. But Carter Bradley, Gus Bradley, former defensive coordinator of the Silver and Black, that's his son. A lot of people had some questions about him. He was mainly a practice squad guy last season, so he is no longer with the Silver and Black. And I saw that he was had some CFL. There was some rights, some CFL teams or the league itself had some rights to him, and so he might end up playing the CFL. He may resurface in the NFL. Not too sure, but Carter Bradley waived on Monday, and it got me to thinking, was that because they're just satisfied with the 3 arms that are there, and those are the ones that they want to focus in on and give Carter Bradley an opportunity to maybe get picked up by a CFL team or picked up by another NFL team ahead of camp? Or could they have been creating a roster spot for one Jack Bech, the Raiders' 2nd-round pick out of TCU, the wide receiver that is still unsigned? And again, the Raiders are reporting to camp, at least their rookies are, on the 17th. So you want to make sure that all your guys are in camp. So they could have been creating a roster spot as far as I'm concerned, but I don't know that, right? Again, this is just me spitballing. This is just kind of going with my gut feeling. To be able to get a guy under contract and put him on the roster, you have to have a spot for him. You're only allowed 90 guys in training camp. The Raiders actually have 91 because they have the NFL Gateway Program player that doesn't count against the roster, so they technically have 91, but they have to have a spot for Jack Bech when or if he signs his contract sooner rather than later. And speaking of Jack Bech and his contract, he is one of 30 second-round picks that does not have their contract. We've talked about that quite a bit, talked about it, and you heard from Joel Corry from CBS Sports, former NFL agent, as he was a guest on my radio show about a month ago, maybe a little bit more than that, and said, yeah, nothing to see here, Q. He'll be under contract by the start of training camp. Well, here we are, right, just a couple of days away from the rookies reporting, and he's still not under contract, as the other guys, the other 29 guys in the second round are not signed either. Only a couple guys actually are under contract. So I had Joel Corry from CBS Sports, again, former sports agent, as a guest on my show on Monday, just to get a little bit of an update. And, from a former sports agent point of view, how would he be feeling heading into rookie minicamp, or not minicamp, but rookie training camp without a guy having his contract, and how that could really set him up for failure, letting him get a little bit behind. You want to be able to get as many reps as possible. So I started off the conversation asking about the rookies reporting to camp on Thursday. Bech is still unsigned. He's not the only one. Like I mentioned, 30 guys remain unsigned. What should we expect to happen next for Jack Bech and the rest of those guys? Here's Joel Corry.
Well, you're going to see signings in the next couple of days. What the big holdup has been is the agents are allowed to collude, talk to each other, but teams can't do that, although they may or may not be doing that, and there's no smoking gun, they don't get caught. That being said, the agents know that Tyler Shuck, the 8th pick in the round, who is expecting to be the Saints starting quarterback, wants a fully guaranteed contract. Up until this year, you didn't have any second rounders that had fully guaranteed contracts. The two guys who signed did. The guys in front of Shuck want to wait as long as they can to see if he gets one. Then they'll have more ammunition to do so. The guys after him want to try to benefit from a trickle-down effect. Now, the Chargers have already had their rookies report because they play in the Hall of Fame game. Their second rounder is still unsigned, although they reported on the 12th. Veterans report on the 16th. The agents will play a role in this, and then the anxiousness of the players. David Mulligetta, Deshaun Watson's agent, among others, Jordan Loves, has that Chargers pick. So he's fully comfortable waiting. You're not going to see people at the end of the round getting fully guaranteed contracts. Last year, after the 12th pick, you didn't have the third year fully guaranteed. A slight portion was fully guaranteed. So for where Jack Bech is in the round, it's how much of the third year salary will be fully guaranteed. Last year, the 26th pick in the second round had 10.2% of his third year salary fully guaranteed.
So what would you say when if a player, you being the sports agent, and a player is unsigned and is in this situation and says, hey, Joel, just get the deal done. I need to get to camp. I want to be there on time so I can learn. Would that be something that's frowned upon because, well, you're missing out on some guaranteed money, or would you just roll with it?
Well, you work for the client. The client doesn't work for you, so it's your job to execute the client's wishes. Mm-hmm. Now, that being said, you could explain to your client what's going on, who's signing potentially before you do. So today is the 14th. The Raiders don't report to the 17th. You might say, if you really want to get there on time, we can have you signed on the 17th. Actually, he can really miss the rookie days. You really don't want to be there any later than when the veterans report. So that is actually the 22nd. Todd France is the agent, so he's probably going to try to convince the player 22nd is the real date. Todd France is Dak Prescott's agent, so that's all you really need to know about him. But you're going to look at the teams around you. You've got the Lions at 20, who have the 25th pick right in front of you. That's the 16th is when they report. And you look at the agents for the rookies. The veterans report on the 19th. CAA, prominent agency, has that pick. You're going to look at who's right behind you. That's the Ravens. 15th is when the rookies report. 22nd is when the veterans report. CAA, prominent agency, probably not going to do anything stupid. So you're going to look at stuff like that to help determine when you're going to try to actually get the deal done. Todd France is of Athletes First, so that factors in the equation. Dave Mulligetta, Athletes First. So those are the things that the agents around this part of the round and then wherever they are in the draft will look at. Who's in front of me, who's behind me, the quality of the agent, when are the teams going to report, and that's going to decide when I'm going to have to pull the trigger if it's before Tyler Shuck gets done. And by the way, the Saints don't report until the 22nd, rookies and veterans, so he's not going to really help a lot of these guys.
Former sports agent Joel Corry, currently part of CBS Sports, breaking that down right there. Thought that was very informative, him going through all the sports agents, right, all the guys that we know are heavy hitters across the league. And Jack Bech is represented by David Mulligetta, right, the same guy that represents Dak Prescott. We saw what he was able to get Dak's deal done, $60 million, right? And so he knows how to get it done. Now, I'm not saying that he's going to get Jack Bech any kind of contract like that. I mean, Dak is the highest paid quarterback in the league, $60 million a year. We know Jack's not going to get anything like that, but he's a veteran in the sports agent business, so he's going to tell him how he needs to get his business handled. It'll be interesting to see if Jack Bech is one of those that I mentioned to Joel, like, hey, I just need to get in camp, just go get the deal done, and then he goes and gets the deal done, or if he follows his agent's directions and just, sits it out until they can get that deal, then come to a resolution. It was also interesting that Joel pointed out the 22nd, how that's really the day. He doesn't really have to worry about getting there when the rookies report on the 17th, which is Thursday. But as long as he's there by the 22nd, which is not that much longer, but it does give him a little bit more wiggle room. So that was a little bit encouraging, knowing that the 22nd is really more like the hard date as opposed to the 17th. So we'll see how it all plays out. He says he expects to see guys start to sign in the next couple days or so. So maybe at this point, whenever you're listening to the show, maybe there's already been a couple guys signed. Hell, maybe Jack Bech has already signed his deal as well. Obviously, it's something that we'll be following leading into Thursday and also leading into next week when the Raiders as a team, the veterans, report for training camp as well. And here's one more interesting little nugget that I saw on Twitter on Monday night. Max Crosby, he's dropping an EP. That's what he said on Twitter. Dropping an EP before the season. Haven't put anything out in years. Going to show y'all a hobby of mine. Pressure. So it sounds like Max Crosby's going to be a rapper. Put out a little bit of a project, a little bit of an EP, which is about 6 songs. So that'll be interesting. I'm sure everyone will check it out. We obviously remember Darren Waller and his rap career, and Darren did some good stuff on Wax for a little while, and then there was some stuff that I was like, probably not too good. But it sounds like Max Crosby is gonna put out a little piece of something, a little work, right? A little EP before the season gets started. So hopefully, not that I'm ever worried about Max not being locked in on what he's supposed to do. Hopefully the EP is just about done, and he can not worry about that heading into training camp. But I guess be on the lookout for Max Crosby and his EP. As he said on Twitter, he's dropping it before the season. That's what I got for you for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Little news and notes, and there's a couple other notes around the league, but I don't need to bring it to the table right now. Maybe we'll talk about it on tomorrow's show, and again, talk about how the Raiders and their front office is operating differently than they have in the past, and I think it's a really good thing. But that's a note for tomorrow. Nothing big that we have to talk about on right now. But we do got to get into the Mount Rushmore, the project that the Locked On Podcast Network had me put together, with the Raiders organization. Very, very difficult. Over 30 Hall of Famers in the history of the organization, and other guys that aren't in the Hall of Fame that are probably worthy of the spot on the Mount Rushmore as well. Oh, by the way, you can't put a coach or an owner on the Mount Rushmore, which, eliminates a couple of icons when it comes to the silver and black. So got a really good tweet about what I didn't do when I put together my Mount Rushmore. We'll talk about that coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about the title sponsor of the show, and that is Gametime. We've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show that you've been waiting so desperately to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping, and that's where Gametime comes in. It makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. The prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their great last-minute deals. The zone deals, it's great. You can scroll through and they'll pick the best seats in the section for you. They've got panoramic seat view. That's one of my favorite features on the app, where you see exactly what it looks like from your seats before you buy the tickets. So you know what you're going to get before you get them. And with Gametime, the price you see is actually the price you pay. There are no hidden fees. And if you worry about, well, maybe my plans change and I won't be able to use the tickets, don't worry. The Gametime guarantee has your back with cancellation protection and a whole lot more. So what I'm trying to tell you is right now, take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Gametime. Download the app, create an account, use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to continue with the Mount Rushmore conversation, and this is not something that I just all of a sudden popped into my head. It's like, hey, let's put together a Raiders Mount Rushmore. I probably would have never even thought about doing it because the Raiders have so many great players in the history of the organization. I feel like it's almost impossible to narrow it down to 4. Remember, Mount Rushmore only has 4 heads on it. Right. So, there's only 4. So as many Hall of Famers as the Raiders have alone is over 30. Right. So there you go. Where are you going to go in your options? I tried to put Al Davis and John Madden on it, but I was informed that it's players only. So there you go. I mean, 2 spots would have gone to Madden and Al Davis from me if I could have done that, but I couldn't do that. And there was a little bit of pushback that I had, like, wait, hold on. I'm putting together a Mount Rushmore and I can't put Al Davis on it for the Raiders. And man, this is one of those times when you wish that you were, covering the Carolina Panthers or the Jacksonville Jaguars or, a team like that doesn't have the history of the Raiders. And you know what? It's funny. Ari brought up a good point on Monday that the Raiders might actually be the hardest team to put this together because they have so many representations. Now, I know there's other historical teams like the Steelers, obviously the 49ers as well, right? The Dallas Cowboys, the Patriots have their history. Like there's a lot of teams that have history, but it just feels like, especially when you think about, coaches, John Madden, you could talk about Tom Flores. Obviously, you're talking about Al Davis as well. Like just those guys alone. Right. I mean, that's already, a 3 out of 4 or 2 out of the 4 that you would put on the Mount Rushmore. So what I ended up going with, because owners and coaches were not allowed, has to be players. I went with Jim Otto, original Mr. Raider, right? Tim Brown, touchdown Timmy, Kenny Stabler, the Snake, right? And then Marcus Allen. Those are the 4 I went with, knowing somebody was going to be like, yeah, Q, you missed this, you missed that. And it was tough because I'm a Charles Woodson guy. He's my favorite Raider of all time. But again, going back to the history of the team, it made it difficult for me to even put C. Wood on there. And again, my favorite Raider of all time. So it was hard for me to keep my own favorite guy off of the Mount Rushmore. But there was a really good tweet that I got early on Monday, probably about Monday afternoon. And I thought it was worth bringing to the table and mentioning because I think he brings up a good point. Mostradamus, at Jam Ram Raiders on Twitter, let's put it like that. He said, Q, good Mount Rushmore list, but you failed to put a defensive player on it. I think you have to have at least one player that played D. I don't think he's wrong, right? When I thought about it, and I didn't even realize it when I was going through it that I didn't have a defensive player on there. I just went with who I thought was best fit for it. But again, it goes to the point of there's so many options that you can go with for the Raiders for their Mount Rushmore. You could put together, in all sincerity, you could put together an all-defensive Mount Rushmore and still have guys that you snubbed, right? So I started thinking about it from Nostradamus' point of view. I'm thinking, okay, Howie Long makes a lot of sense. Willie Brown makes a lot of sense. Ted Hendricks makes a lot of sense. Charles Woodson, a guy I mentioned earlier. Like Greg Townsend's not even in the Hall of Fame, and he could be there. Lester Hayes, same thing, not in the Hall of Fame. He could be there. That's just 6 guys I rattled off right there that I think could all be worthy of it. Mike Haynes, one of my favorite guys. I talk to him all the time. He's a guy that you could put up there. You could put Haynes and Hayes up there as a great 1-2 punch at the cornerback position. Like, there's so many different guys in different directions that you can go. But if I'm looking at my Mount Rushmore, and again, that we did this exercise for the Locked On Podcast Network, every single team that is represented, all 32 teams, the host of that show had to put it together. I mean, who do I take off, right? I mean, that's always the big question. Okay, so if you're going to, put something and replace somebody, who are you taking off? You got Jim Otto on there, Tim Brown, Kenny Stabler, Marcus Allen. I mean, I guess I could go and maybe take maybe take the Snake off and just say, okay, well, I didn't see him, or Jim Otto, I didn't see him. But again, just respecting the history of of the Raiders, that's really hard to do. I think all 4 of the guys that I mentioned are worthy. But if there's supposed to be a defensive representation on there, if I got to put one defensive player just out of the guys I mentioned, right, who would I put there? Howie Long, Willie Brown, Ted Hendricks, Charles Woodson, Greg Townsend, Lester Hayes. I probably would go with Howie Long because he was a guy that I watched all the time. Love watching Howie Long, and we all know he's a Hall of Famer. He's an all-time great, but then Willie Brown, right, the original number 24 before C. Wood. Right, maybe that's the direction that you go. Right, we all know how much Willie Brown meant to the organization of the Raiders. Ted Hendricks, right? How many times have you heard Max Crosby, compared to Ted Hendricks? Right, he even laughs all the time. It's like, yeah, of course they always, kind of compare me to Ted Hendricks, but I mean, you're talking about a gold jacket. So if that's who they're going to compare you to, regardless of why he may think that they're regarding him like that, that's fine. He's a Hall of Famer, right? And I know it's something Max Crosby wants to be. I probably would go with Howie Long because I'm most familiar with him, but then at the same time, I would have a problem not putting Charles Woodson on there. The reason I didn't put C. Wood on there originally is because he won a Super Bowl and Defensive Player of the Year with the Green Bay Packers. One could argue, and I've heard this argument. Matter of fact, I had this argument one time with Bonte Hill when he was still part of 95.7 The Game up in the Bay, and he said, one would argue that Charles Woodson was actually a better Packer than he was Raider. And to me, it was like, man, that's almost like spitting in my face. I was so angry when he said that, but I understood what he meant, right? I mean, a Super Bowl victory in Green Bay, Defensive Player of the Year. I mean, C. Wood was the dude when he was there in Green Bay. And, he obviously left the Raiders as a free agent, but then he returned. So one could argue that, yeah, he had a bigger impact with the Green Bay Packers in a smaller amount of time than he did, with the Raiders. But that's the only reason why I left him off, even though, again, my favorite Raider of all time. So that is a tough call, but I totally understand where he's coming from when he says that you got to have at least one defensive player. So, I mean, you put one quarterback on there, maybe one wide receiver. Some could argue that, you should have put Freddie Biletnikoff on there, but he last played in 78 and I was born in 76. So, as much as I know how great Freddie Biletnikoff was, and as much as I, have talked to him, interviewed him, right? Again, I know what he means to the history of the Raiders as well. It's hard for me to not put touchdown Tim Brown on there just because of everything that he meant. And again, another guy that I saw all the time. So, man, it's so hard to decide who you're going to take off of there. Otto, Brown, Stabler, or Allen, and I got to put Howie Long on there, and I got to take one of those other guys off. That, to me, even thinking about it and saying it out loud right now, is so difficult. I probably would go with either probably Stabler or Otto, but I would feel dirty for doing that. Like, I can't believe you just did that. What is wrong with you? So it's a great problem to have if you're the Raiders organization, but it's a problem. And maybe that's why the Raiders should not put together a Mount Rushmore. Maybe they should do it. I had someone suggest to me maybe do it by decades, do it by, defense, offense, whatever the case may be. I mean, there's a conversation that Ray Guy could be on there, right? Punter. Right? There's a conversation that you could put a special teams guy on there if you wanted to do it. I mean, that's how much greatness the Silver and Black has had in the organization. But I thought that was definitely worth pointing out and kind of pulling to the side when I got that tweet on Monday morning from Nostradamus at Jam Ram Raiders on Twitter. Good Mount Rushmore list, but you failed. Maybe the word failed got me to put a defensive player on it. I think you have to have at least one player that played D. Again, you could have a player that's not even in the Hall of Fame on the Mount Rushmore if you want to. Greg Townsend definitely fits that, and so does Lester Hayes. But we'll hear from you next. A lot of feedback, as you can imagine, especially a couple days out from the rookies reporting to training camp. This is a hot topic. Got a lot of great feedback, calls and texts. We'll hear from you next as we close out the show. 707-654-4693. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts are off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. As you can imagine, Mount Rushmore, Mount Rushmore, Mount Rushmore. That is the conversation in this segment. We'll start things off with PT in Danville. He's calling to talk about Brock Bowers and the Raiders Mount Rushmore. Here he is, PT in Danville.
Hey, Q. This is PT in Danville, and I'm calling back after listening to your show on Brock Bowers and the Mount Rushmore. And my hope is that Brock Bowers can stay productive, but I don't necessarily need to see him with as many catches or receiving yards. I think part of the reason why he had such stacked stats in his rookie year was because the Raiders were throwing on early downs because they were trying to dig themselves out of deficits and just trying to air it out. So my hope is that we get the running game more involved with Genty and Mostert, and some of the other receivers really pick up their roles. So Brock Bowers still has 900, 1,000 yards, a bunch of catches, but what I want to see is more touchdowns. So I think that means if we score more points, I think we'll win more games. And then just a side note for my Mount Rushmore, and everybody's is respectfully different, which is why it's a fun activity, is I have Jim Otto, 00. I met Jim Otto at Jack Del Rio's bocce ball fundraiser 5-6 years ago. So it was an honor to get to meet him. along with a lot of other Raiders there, like Derek Carr and Khalil Mack and Raider alumni. So I've got him. I've got Charles Woodson, just because he's in my era, and Tim Brown, our leader in receptions and yards. And then I also want to give it to Derek Carr, just for providing stability. So, everyone's got their own. I think those are mine. See you later. Thanks for all you do. Bye.
PT, thanks so much for the call. Appreciate you. And yeah, when it comes to Brock Bowers, also part of the conversation I had on Monday's show, I agree 100%, right? His numbers might not be as good or impressive as his rookie year, but it could be more effective, especially if he gets more touchdowns, as you mentioned. 5 touchdowns his rookie year. If he could double that and maybe not have 112 catches and almost 1,200 yards, maybe has around 100 catches and, just over 1,000 yards, I'd be fine with that if you're getting 10 touchdowns as opposed to 5. Either way, I think that he's going to continue to grind and continue to get better because that's just who Brock Bowers is. Excited about seeing what he can do year 2 with competent quarterback play from Geno Smith. So looking forward to that. As far as the as far as the Mount Rushmore goes, I mean, man, Jim Otto, Charles Woodson, Tim Brown. I think those 3 right there, I think Raider Nation is going to agree with you every day of the week and twice on Sunday. I don't think anyone will have any argument. But then you brought up DC, and you know that's gonna ruffle some feathers. That's gonna bring up some arguments. I think it's really tough to put him on there. He did stabilize the position. He held it down for 9 years. He's the leading passer in the history of the organization as far as yards go. But when you have a team, an organization that has over 30 Hall of Famers, and you have guys like Kenny the Snake Snabler, you have guys like Jim Plunkett, you have guys like even Rich Gannon, who led the Raiders to the Super Bowl, even though they lost, was a league MVP. It's really hard to put Derek Carr on that list. So I think that as much as I respect it, I understand it, it makes sense, and it's your list, so I respect it, right? It's your Mount Rushmore. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. I just think the Raider Nation would have a hard time getting behind that selection only because you have these other quarterbacks that have been way more successful than DC. Even though he's got the yards, he doesn't have the Super Bowl visits. He doesn't have a playoff victory, right? So I don't think that any of Raider Nation, well, I don't want to say any. I think the majority of Raider Nation would disagree with what you said. But again, your Mount Rushmore, not mad at you at all. I mean, again, we can all go with the players that we saw. And for you, that might be the guy that you saw the most of play at the quarterback position. And, you were happy with what he did. As you said, he stabilized the position. So maybe that's, why you put him on there. I just think that there'll be a lot of pushback from Raider Nation trying to put him on Mount Rushmore. Did some really good things. He should retire as a Raider as far as I'm concerned. I think he'll someday go back and light the Al Davis torch at Allegiant Stadium, and all will be good. I can't see him on the Mount Rushmore of Raiders. Just too many greats in the history of the organization. But thanks so much for the call. I appreciate you. Up next, got a text from Ant Dog in the ATL. Yo, Q, Ant Dog Raider from the ATL. I want to chime in on my Mount Rushmore conversation. Here's my list based on the criteria from the show. Kenny Stabler, Marcus Allen, Tim Brown. They go without saying. But for me, Lyle, 3 Mile Lyle Alzado. His style of play was what the Raiders' mystique is all about. He may have not had the greatest numbers, but his cultural impact is undeniable. This was tough. So protecting and so many players, Howie Long, Gene Upshaw, Matt Millen, when he punched the Patriots GM trying to protect Howie Long, solidified my love for the Raiders. There are truly too many great Raiders players to narrow it down to 4. Keep up the great work on the show and the Raider Squad show as always. Raiders. That's from Ant Dog in the ATL. I agree right there, right with what you said at the end, right? Too many great Raider players to narrow it down to 4. It makes this difficult job that much even more difficult trying to do that. And as Ari pointed out to me, I think that this may be the toughest team in the league to narrow down to 4 just because the greatness came from everywhere, from ownership to coaches to players, right? Hall of Famers and guys that aren't even in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Thanks for the text. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a call from Stabler's Ghost, also calling to talk about the Mount Rushmore that I rolled out on Monday's show, and disagrees with me slightly, and he'll let us know where those disagreements are. Here he is, Stabler's Ghost.
Q, Stabler's Ghost from the great Northeast, repping the 518 one time. I just heard your Mount Rushmore of Raider players, and it's a good thing they said players because immediately I was saying Al Davis and John Madden take 2 of those spots automatically. But since it's all players, the only pick that you had that I kind of disagree with a little bit is Tim Brown. I love Tim Brown, but Fred Biletnikoff caught passes in Super Bowls. And I love Kenny the Snake Stabler, but my favorite all-time Raider, who I got to see because I'm a little long in the tooth, was Jim Plunkett. Jim Plunkett won Super Bowls, just like Kenny Stabler did, except he got 2. So I would probably switch out Fred Biletnikoff for Tim Brown, and I might switch out, I might switch out the Snake for Jim Plunkett. Other than that, you were dead on. And actually, whoever you said is amazing and deserving. But there's also so many. Like you just mentioned, Howie Long. Howie Long could easily be there. I mean, you think Ted Hendricks, Lester Hayes, Willie Brown. I mean, it just goes on and on. We're an iconic franchise, and we need to get back to the top where we belong. Anyway, you and Ari kill it, as always, and let's go
Stablers Ghost, appreciate you. Thanks for the call. And, you can add Freddie B and Jim Plunkett, right? I think they could easily be added to the Mount Rushmore. The fact that I didn't have a defensive player, well, that's something as well, right? Pretty wild. I didn't even realize it when I did it. Honestly, until it was pointed out to me on Twitter on Monday, I didn't even realize that I didn't have a defensive player on there. And I think anyone who's listened to the show knows that I'm big on defense. I love defensive players. I love what they bring to the table. Love the nasty that they bring to the table. And, of course, defensive backs. I'm always going to cut for the defensive back. But not to have any defensive player on there, that was something that caught my attention as well. But, Al Davis not being on there, John Madden, I obviously had a problem following directions because I really did try to put them on there multiple times. Even after they told me the first time, hey, you can't put Al Davis on there or John Madden. You have to only have players. I'm like, wait, I can't tell the story of the Raiders without those guys on there. But overruled. And look, Tom Flores is a guy you could put on there as well. It doesn't have to be just John Madden. You can easily put Tom Flores as well. There's many different reasons that you could put coaches, people that are in the organization as far as the front office and ownership could do that as well with the silver and black. But thanks so much for the call. Definitely appreciate you. Up next, got a text from Voodoo Rick 66. He says, hey there, I was listening to your picks for the Mount Rushmore 4. I agree that all your picks are very deserving, but there's another one that deserves that honor. Gene Upshaw was the living, breathing essence of the Raiders. I know Jim Otto played his entire career with the Raiders, but Gene did as well. From one Del Amigo alum to another, just thought he would be very much worth mentioning. Thanks. That's Voodoo Rick 66. And again, like I said to everyone, you're not wrong. Gene Upshaw definitely very well deserving. He is just like you said, the breathing essence, right? He was the living, breathing essence of the Raiders. There's no doubt about that. Between him and Jim Otto and some of the other greats that were along that Raiders offensive line, man, those guys are all definitely well worth the mention. And kind of goes back to Ant Dog and the ATL, his text, right? It's just way too many great Raiders players to narrow down to 4. That's what Ant Dog said. I agree as well. But Voodoo Rick 66, Del Amigo alum, thanks so much for the text. I appreciate you. Just got time for a couple more. This call comes from Jacob in Wilmington, North Carolina, giving his Mount Rushmore and has his own thoughts on what it should be and why. Now, Jacob bends the rules a little bit. Here's Jacob.
Hey, Joe. Hey, Ari. Hey, Raider Nation. This is Jacob Mazza from Wilmington, North Carolina. Just calling in to, tell you about my Raiders Mount Rushmore. Now, all right, there's going to be some changes in my Mount Rushmore, and there's going to have to be some qualifications. To, be on my Mount Rushmore, you have to have won a Super Bowl. All right? So, I'm going to go defense, offense, special teams, head coach, quarterback. Defense, Matt Miller, linebacker, Penn State. Special teams, Ray Guy. Man, first round punter. The only punter to ever make it in the first round and in the Hall of Fame. All right. Offense, Jim Otto, the original OG, triple OG Raider. Then I'm going to go with head coach, which everybody wants to say John Madden, but I like Flores more. And for my quarterback, give me Jim Plunkett. Man, the resurrection story, I don't know why they will not put him in the Hall of Fame. I mean, congratulations to Eric Allen. And I know that they don't like putting Raiders in the Hall of Fame, but Jim Plunkett, his story, they needed to make a movie out of it, and like 2-time Super Bowl winner. He deserves it, if you ask me. I hope, I speak this into the universe. Anyways, yo, Raider Nation, Q, Ari, it's Monday for me. Let's have a beautiful week, y'all. It's about to be football season. Just win. Peace.
Okay, so Jacob in Wilmington, North Carolina, you have to win a Super Bowl. That's good with me if you want to do that. If that's part of your criteria, got to have won a Super Bowl, okay. Maybe that narrows it down a little bit. You still have over 30 Hall of Famers in the history of your organization, so there's plenty of guys that won a Super Bowl. But with that being said, Matt Miller at linebacker, Ray Guy at punter, Jim Otto at center, Tom Flores as coach, and Jim Plunkett as quarterback, those are all worthy guys. Tom Flores is a coach, and that was one of the rules that I had to follow. Can't put a coach on there. And you also brought up 5 guys. Mount Rushmore is only 4. So unless you're creating a new Mount Rushmore and you're deciding that, you're going to be like a basketball team and have a starting 5, that's not going to work, right? It's only 4. There's no room for an extra added head on the mountain, right? You have to only do 4. So again, I think you just proved my point, how difficult it is just to narrow it down to 4. I mean, you just rattled off 5 guys just off top, right, at different positions: linebacker, special teams, offensive line, coach, and quarterback. Just right there, right? I mean, that's again proves the point of how difficult it is when you think about the silver and black. And then no coaches, no ownership. I mean, those rules are tough to follow. But thanks for the call. Definitely appreciate you. And we'll close things out with a text from Clark Raider 46. Actually, this is a short one, so we'll get a call in too. Clark Raider says, "What's up, Q? It's Clark Raider 46, the TSA dude that hollered at you that day at the Las Vegas airport. Long-time listener, first-time texter. I had to get my Raider Mount Rushmore in. Cliff Branch, Freddie Bolitnikoff, Howie Long, Tim Brown. But I'll admit, one of my favorite players growing up was Todd Christensen. So many players to choose from. Love what you do. Raiders." Those are all very worthy players. Cliff Branch put into the Pro Football Hall of Fame too late, right, after he passed away. Not cool. Freddie Bolitnikoff, obviously, he was the MVP. He was the dude, right? Freddie Bolitnikoff, I just didn't get to see him because he ended his career in 78. Howie Long, mentioned him. He's the guy, if you're talking about defense, I probably should have thrown him on there, and I didn't. And then touchdown Tim Brown. Not mad at that. Todd Christensen's a great option, though. I was a big fan of Todd, too. So, Clark Raider, it was great seeing you at the airport, man. Appreciate you hollering at me, and definitely appreciate you supporting the show. Thanks so much for the text. We'll close things out with a call from Eric, the Rockin' Raider. He's calling as well to talk about Mount Rushmore, get his thoughts on it, including where he thinks I missed the mark. Here's Eric, the Rockin' Raider.
Hey, Q, Eric, the Rockin' Raider, checking in after listening to your Monday show. Always my first listen. And I love the show. Excited that training camp is almost here, but wanted to comment on your Mount Rushmore of the Raiders. I was fortunately lucky enough to watch the Raider Vikings Super Bowl as my first Super Bowl at 10 or 11 years old. And I think you're spot on with Kenny Stabler on Mount Rushmore. Matter of fact, he's my favorite Raider player of all time. That guy had some swagger like no other. I even named my Cocker Spaniel that was silver and black Kenny in his honor. Rest in peace, Kenny. Number 2, Marcus Allen. The best running back in the history of the Raiders, hands down, a game changer that delivered 2 Super Bowls for us. Marcus Allen, absolutely the GOAT right there. Tim Brown. I mean, this guy, he played for so long for us. Definitely the best receiver in the history of the Raiders. For longevity and other reasons. It's a shame he did not get a ring. I really wish he would have got a ring. But anyway, my 4th player, though, I don't think I would take Jim Otto, and maybe that's the bias of not being old enough to have seen him play. But you also miss out on any defensive players on your Mount Rushmore. There's got to be at least one defensive player to diversify, Q. Howie Long. Howie Long is the dude. He would wreck things for the other team, and so I put him up there. But love the show, Q. If you have time before it gets too busy, I'd love to get a little bit more analysis on Chip Kelly, maybe some deep dive into what he did well or didn't do well, his last year in college and his previous stops. But anyway, Q, love what you do. Can't wait for the new season. Eric, the Rockin' Raider in Phoenix out. Go Raiders.
Eric, I appreciate you. Thanks for the call. And yeah, that's fair. No defensive player. That's what Nostradamus tweeted at me and mentioned that, that I needed to do that. And that's fine, right? I have no problemo putting Howie Long on there. But when you're asking me to take Mr. Raider 00, the original, off, that's tough, right? I mean, now, again, I went back and forth and I thought, okay, if I'm going to put Howie Long on, who do I take off? I struggled with taking it off, and just because I know what Jim Otto meant to the history of the Raiders, I know what Kenny the Snake Stabler meant to the organization. I also picked Tim Brown, who we know, it took him a while to get into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but very much worth it. And Marcus Allen, right? I mean, you talk about him as one of the greatest running backs in the history of the team. So it's really hard to just, oh, hey, man, you didn't get this guy on there. You need to put this on there. All right, it's no problem putting a guy on, but who do you take off? That's why it makes this exercise so difficult. I say we don't do it. Like, we decide, you know what, we're going to sit this exercise out when it comes to the Locked On Podcast Network putting together the Mount Rushmores. I'm just kidding. Definitely didn't do that. Again, I put mine in, but, man, it was one of the most difficult exercises that I had to do so far on this network. But that's all I got time for on today's show. I'm sure we'll get plenty more feedback on this. We'll continue to evolve the conversations as well as we get closer and closer to Thursday when the Raiders report for rookie camp. Obviously, we're paying attention to Jack Bech. Will he get his contract signed before Thursday? Will he get his contract signed before the 22nd? We'll be here to talk about it each and every day as we do here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. So until tomorrow, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.